Hello, hello, everyone. This is the SCP podcast, and I am your host, Dr. J. And today we have one of my most favorite guests, Ann Bowers-Evangelista. How are you, Ann?
I am doing great, Dr. J. So great to see you always.
It's so great to see you as well. So I would love for you to kind of just let our guests know, who is Dr. Anna Bowers-Evangelista?
Yes, well, MBE is certainly easier, so always start with that. I am a 22-year consulting psychologist, 23. Somewhere around there. I have been in love with this field since graduate school. So a little about my background. I went to Widener University, like probably some of the folks tuning in. Go Widener. I don't even know what our mascot is. So we'll just... and I did the dual degree program, got a PsyD MBA, and actually started doing consulting while I was still in graduate school. So worked in a consulting firm for a practicum rotation, and then took an executive coaching course. And really, that was kind of the beginning of the end for me. My clinical interests kind of veered then into the consulting space, and really there was no looking back. So I spent some time in some consulting firms and then opened my own practice in 2012. And it's great. I focus primarily on leadership development, as well as selection work, doing work at the individual and team levels. And my new passion, as many of your folks might know, is what I call endurance leadership, which is using the principles of endurance athletics to build long-term leadership success, which so many of our leaders need right now, because the short-term solutions are not working. So that's a little about me.
Thank you. And I think you recently presented on endurance leadership, right?
I did, yes. Like you, I presented at the American Psychological Association convention on that very topic. So there's a lot of interesting need coming forward, particularly as people are talking so much about feeling stressed and burned out and just not knowing how to get off of the treadmill. So hopefully that's a good opportunity. Yeah.
Yes. And so kind of using that as a segue into this, why you're on today's episode, I think you can speak a lot to this, as you were sharing with your MBA background and your psychology background. Tell us a little bit because you're touching on the psychology piece on leadership, but I know that you've worked a lot with MBA. So just tell us how those two degrees that you do have, those two backgrounds, how do they complement your work and your approach to your clients?
That's such a great question. And it's probably not asked enough, in my opinion. I will tell you that I didn't have a business bone in my body until I got to graduate school. And really what made me think that doing this dual degree program would be a good idea was I thought, well, if I'm a clinician, one of two things is going to happen. I'm going to go work in some community-based setting or in a hospital, and it's very likely that I will have to manage people, or I'm going to open a practice, and then I'm going to own a business. And I don't know the first thing about business. So maybe this is a great opportunity to learn. And I think it's one of the places where, as psychologists, we can have a little bit of blinders on around the importance of really knowing and understanding at least some very basic kind of practicalities around business. And, an MBA is certainly a very different approach than psychology, right? So in the MBA program, and it's really focusing so much on I think of it as like the anatomy and the physiology of the business. And then the psychology is layered in there, but really thinking about how our business is structured. What are the macro and microeconomic systems that are influencing what's happening, in various markets? What are the, global issues that are impacting businesses? Well, how do you understand what's on a balance sheet, or read a profit and loss statement? These kinds of things that many of us are not used to. They're not language that we really get psychological training. And it's for our clients, it's the language they're speaking every single day. And so while you might be working with them on a consultative project, or you might be doing some coaching work, they are never, ever apart from that business language and the pressures and the realities of business. So the more that you can know the language that they're using, you don't have to be an expert. You don't even have to have an MBA, but knowing something about what are their business challenges, what's keeping them up at night from a business perspective, these things can really help create a more robust dialogue between you and your client.
I love this robust dialogue that you're talking about, that even we as psychologists can start having, and walking into a lot of our meetings and into a lot of our, even if it's a prospective client, just ready to kind of take that on and knowing that, I can have this conversation, I will understand them. I know you shared a story with me before about, how you were sort of this psychologist working in a sea of MBAs. Tell us your experience about that and how that brought you even to where you are today.
Yeah, that's it was a great experience in so many ways. I had never worked with, kind of people who were trained in very traditional MBA programs. And in fact, all of the people that I worked with were from Ivy League MBA programs. So they weren't just MBAs, they were all really high level MBAs, and they had all worked for one of the big kind of consulting firms. So, think of the places like the McKinseys and the Boston Consulting Groups and Accentures and those kinds of places. So their backgrounds were so intensely around a lot of the macro level dynamics that are happening in organizations and how to solve big strategic and operational problems. And that was there was so much great learning from their experiences and their backgrounds. They also told really fun horror stories about those experiences as well in those consulting firms. And so what I saw in having a couple of psychologists in the mix was that we really brought a level of human understanding to their business language. So while they had capacity to really understand, again, think of like anatomy and physiology of the way that the body of the organization works, so the psychology of it was really informed often by those of us who were psychologists. So we, for example, in this firm, we didn't use any assessments in doing hiring selection processes.
Hold on, I have to stop you there because that is the cardinal rule. Okay, what do you mean you didn't use assessments? What is
that? Did not use any assessments. It's a 4.5 hour, very structured interview process.
Wow.
But what I found in that environment, for me, the disconnect was there was such a treasure trove of information that we weren't able to capitalize on. So while you could have all of this information from this robust interview, 300 points of data, it's all great. But understanding underneath the surface of what the individual is saying, to be able to put the connections into personality-based information wasn't there. And so it's informed and really helped me double down since that experience to say, I'm really glad to kind of understand many of these processes. And I will say, these MBA programs just have incredible processes. They have incredible, benefits that we can bring into our relationships with our clients. But the real understanding, what I think about is, if somebody says, why would I hire you over an MBA? And I would say, it depends on what you're wanting to have done. Do you want an organizational restructure? then maybe an MBA is the way you want to go. Do you want to actually think about how you're developing your talent? Do you want somebody who's an expert in human behavior? That's when you want me. So I think it's a really important distinction to make. But again, we want to be able to borrow from the MBA language. And the more exposure as psychologists we have to that, the more facile we are to be able to have those dialogues with our clients. So it's kind of like learning another language, right? That language that they speak. Can they speak the language you're speaking? Yes, on some level they can. But if you can now talk to your client in two different languages, just as if you spoke both Spanish and English to somebody who's a native Spanish speaker and speaks English, you're going to get a whole different contextual level with that person. And it's the same thing with business and psychology.
That is so rich. And I mean, even to our listeners those of you who are listening today and just hearing this, just this conversation that Ann and I are having, what I hear is we don't need to see our psychology background as a weakness or as less than when we walk into the boardroom. We need to see this as a strength, but also connecting the dots with what their needs are. Do I have that right, Ann?
You absolutely have it 100%, Dr. J. I think a lot of people do get nervous in those kinds of spaces. And what I would invite, people to do, especially as you're developing your career, is to recognize there is no one who knows more about human behavior in this room than me. Mm-hmm. And holding on to that in that space, even if you might feel intimidated by business knowledge, people are not likely hiring you for your business acumen. They have that in spades, and they know the firms and the places where they can go to get that. But being able to leverage that language, being able to talk about what are what are some of the market factors that are happening? What are the competitive, analysis happening? So, if there's opportunities for publicly held companies, sit in on shareholder calls, for your own just for your own development, read your proxy statements when you get them, read your K1s for the things you're invested in, start understanding the language. And that helps really understand the pressures that they're experiencing. And then what I see it does is it clears the path for the psychology components, for the human elements to be able to be expressed and appreciated, because all of the kind of the overlay that the business pressures are having, you've already been able to kind of talk about and understand. And now you can really get into the psychology elements. So yeah, feel confident and also make sure you're informed.
Informed, there you go. That's, I think, in just the age of so much information all over the place, to be informed, it may seem rather difficult, but I think many of the things that you've laid out here today, with sitting in on certain conversations, reading, we will never be done with reading. Even if we've graduated, we're never done with that. But we need to be very intentional about going out, making these connections with our MBA counterparts and learning, but also just understanding the value that we also bring to our businesses and also the clients. One last thing, and I would just love to ask you, with just leaving a little nugget for our listeners here, what's a piece of advice that you would have for them? Maybe one of our listeners is out there and they're pitching some new work to, a potential client. What would Ann B.E. say? What would a great psychologist say in a situation like that when we're not as business savvy as our clients maybe?
Yeah, I think the greatest piece of advice I could give is find someone within our space that speaks that language and learn from them. And I won't say get mentored by them, because there may not be a lot of them and we don't want to ask them all now to be mentors. But we have programs within SCP, often at conferences. We've had people like Carolyn Humphrey, who presents on how to really understand the business challenges. Bill Berman has done a number of workshops around. By the way, this does not mean, please, everybody, don't pick up your phones and call Carol and Bill. They're going to kill me. But just for example, these are folks who really understand and can share some of that knowledge. Take a financials for non-financial managers class at your local community college or online. You can find really basic financial and accounting classes on YouTube. Like, you don't have to go to some huge, extent. At the very least, understand what business your client is in, who are their greatest competitors. Can you learn about them from Bloomberg News or, from Yahoo Finance? Find these things out. Make a small amount of investment, even an hour's worth of investment in understanding some of the challenges that your client is facing will be useful. But even more broadly, think about, you're likely a business owner. What are the things that are important to you as a business owner? What are your marketing strategies? What are your business development strategies? How do you make money? What are your operating costs? How do you, manage your billing? And all these things, the more you can understand these for yourself, the easier and more fast, the more natural that language is going to be when you're connecting with your clients. So I know that wasn't a single piece of advice. It was under the umbrella of get a little more information with several pathways to do that.
You said it nicely, Anne, but I will say it very bluntly. We have no excuse to not be informed. As Anne has said here today, we all as psychologists need to be out there in the marketplace where our potential and our current clients are, to pretty much understand their business so that we can be a great asset to their leadership development, to the organizational development, and ultimately to their team development. Thank you so much, Anne, for being here today. We will put information in the bottom if you want to just ping to her and ask her any questions, and also we'll have some Bloomberg and some other links down there so you can just start your own research. So thank you so much, Anne.
So glad to be with you, Dr. J, always.
Thank you. All right, we are out.